I never thought the land my father left me would become the center of a war. That dirt road, lined with old oak trees and wildflowers, wasn't just an entrance, it was the first thing my father's boots touched every morning and the last thing he looked at before the sun went down. I grew up riding my bike along that path, my dog chasing me, my mom's voice calling us in for dinner. To me, it wasn't just a driveway, it was my family's history carved into the earth. So when I came home one quiet Sunday morning and found a steel fence welded shut across it, my hands shook, my heart pounded, and something deep inside me broke. The fence wasn't some accident. It had fresh paint, a shiny lock, and an obnoxious HOA notice pinned right in the middle. Private community property, access denied without approval. My ranch wasn't part of their community, never had been. The HOA, with its smug board members and ridiculous rules, had no legal right to my land. Yet there it was, a bold, physical slap to my face and my father's memory. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the barrier. My truck was stuck on the other side, meaning I couldn't even drive up to my own house. My neighbor, Old Man Harris, shuffled over from across the road. He looked at the fence, shook his head, and said, "They've been talking about this for weeks. Wanted to reroute traffic so their folks wouldn't have to drive the long way. Guess they thought you'd just roll over. Roll over." Chance, my father raised me to stand my ground. But I also knew this fight wouldn't be won with shouting or throwing punches. The HOA had lawyers, influence, and deep pockets. I had something better, patience, and a very personal reason to make them regret what they'd done. I walked down to the HOA office later that day. It was in a smug little brick building with white columns out front, trying way too hard to look important. Inside, I found 3 board members sitting at a polished table, sipping coffee like they were royalty. Karen, the president, her name was actually Karen, smiled, that fake, a tight-lipped smile, and said, "We've decided that entrance you've been using is now part of the community's private access road. It's for the betterment of the neighborhood." "For the betterment of who?" I asked. "Not me, not my land." She tilted her head like she was talking to a child. "You still have your back entrance, don't you?" That back entrance was a washed-out dirt trail barely wide enough for a four-wheeler. In heavy rain, it turned into a river of mud. She knew it wasn't a real option. "This is temporary," Karen added, pretending to sound reasonable. "If you want to regain access, we can discuss terms at our next board meeting. Perhaps a contribution toward maintenance. In other words, pay them to use my own driveway." I left without another word, because if I'd stayed, I might have said something that would land me in jail. But as I walked away, an idea started forming. They thought they'd trapped me. They thought they'd cornered me into paying them. What they didn't realize was that the fence was their biggest mistake, gave me the leverage I needed to turn the tables completely. That night, I dug through my father's old filing cabinet. He'd kept every scrap of paperwork since buying the ranch: surveys, deeds, easements. I found the one I was looking for, a legal document from decades ago, clearly marking that the road leading to my ranch wasn't just mine, it was the only official easement into their neighborhood from the main highway. Without it, they had no legal vehicle access at all. I sat there in the dim light, my hands shaking not from anger now, but from the thrill of knowing I had them in a chokehold. My father had once told me, "Son, the land remembers who owns it. Don't let anyone forget." The next morning, I didn't touch the fence. I didn't call them. I didn't even show up at their precious board meeting. I wanted them to think I was quietly stewing. I wanted them comfortable in their little victory. Meanwhile, I started talking to a lawyerish, sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria, who loved nothing more than dismantling arrogant HOA boards. When I showed her the paperwork, her eyes lit up. "So, They fenced off their own lifeline, she said, grinning. Oh, we're going to have some fun with this. Over the next week, we filed the necessary paperwork to make it official. I was revoking their easement rights. They couldn't legally use the road without my permission. The best part? That fence they'd put up was now blocking their own members from easily getting in. And out of the community, it didn't take long before the complaints started. My phone lit up with unknown numbers. Cars backed up at the fence, people shouting. In frustration, HOA members had to take the long, bumpy back route an extra 25 minutes each way. And when it rained, it became almost impassable. Karen called me personally, her tone sweet as syrup. Let's be reasonable, she said. Reasonable? No, this wasn't about being reasonable anymore. This was about justice, I told her. You wanted control, now you've got it. And if you want access through my land again, you'll pay for every single time you use it. There was a long pause on the line. Then she said, we'll take it to court. I smiled because I already knew how that would end. Go ahead. I've got the paperwork ready. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sun go down over my land, I felt something I hadn't felt since my father passed pride. Not just in keeping what was ours, but in knowing I was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. And, believe me, this was only the beginning. The next morning, the sound of a truck horn jolted me awake. I rubbed my eyes and stepped out onto the porch, only to see a massive iron gate being erected across the dirt road that led to my ranch entrance. 2 HOA board members stood there with clipboards, directing workers like they owned the land. My stomach tightened. This was my property, my driveway, and they were blocking it as if I didn't exist. I stormed down the path, boots crunching on the gravel, and demanded to know what they thought they were doing. The smug grin on Greg's face, the HOA president, made my blood boil. It's community land now, Jake, he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. We voted on it. You'll have to ask permission to pass through. I could feel the heat rising in my face. My hands clenched so hard my nails bit into my skin. I had lived here for over 15 years. This ranch wasn't just dirt and wood, was my father's legacy. I'd grown up riding horses through those open gates, watching my dad wave from the porch after a long day's work. Now, these HOA vultures wanted to erase that history with their petty rules and power games. I told Greg to move his gate off my land, or I'd tear it down myself. He just laughed and walked away, leaving the workers to finish the job. That sound of metal clanging shut felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The real punch in the gut came later that afternoon. I had a shipment of feed coming in, and the delivery truck couldn't get through because of the new gate. I had to park my own tractor at the fence line, load the sacks myself, and haul them the rest of the way up the driveway. Every lift sent a burning ache through my back, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation. I could see neighbors peeking from their windows, whispering as if I'd done something wrong. Over the next week, my life became a constant tug-of-war with that gate. Every time I needed to leave or come back, I had to call Greg's office for approval. Sometimes they wouldn't answer. Sometimes they'd leave me waiting 30 minutes. Once, they flat out refused to open it, claiming I hadn't filed the proper access request for my own home. I had to leave my truck outside and walk a mile through the mud in the pouring rain. By the time I got inside, I was soaked to the bone, my boots caked with muck, my heart pounding with rage. It wasn't just inconvenience, it was deliberate control. They wanted to break me, to force me to bow down to their ridiculous rules. But what they didn't know was that I'd been keeping quiet for a reason. I started documenting every single incident, every time they blocked me, every call unanswered, every lie they told. I took pictures of their workers crossing onto my property, of the gate sitting squarely on land my father had deeded to me decades ago. One night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the old leather-bound folder where my father had kept all the original land records. The smell of dust and aged paper filled the room as I flipped through page after page, until I found it a detailed property map, signed and notarized, showing exactly where my land ended and where the HOAs began. The gate was not just an inconvenience, it was trespassing, plain and simple. That realization lit a fire inside me. They had taken my peace, my time, and my dignity, but they had also made one fatal mistake. They underestimated me. I wasn't just some quiet rancher they could push around. I had the proof, the patience, and now a plan. When I saw Greg at the local diner a few days later, he gave me that same smug smile. I smiled back, but it wasn't the kind of smile he expected. I'd already started laying the groundwork for something he'd never see coming. This wasn't going to be a simple fight. It was going to be the kind of payback that made sure they never tried to mess with me again. When the next morning came, I didn't rush to confront anyone. Instead, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, staring at that ugly new fence like it was a personal enemy. It wasn't just blocking my driveway, it was blocking my life. My truck sat idle, my plans for the week canceled, and my livestock chores were already harder because I had to walk around the fence just to get to the feed barn. I knew that rushing in with anger would only give them satisfaction, so I planned something smarter. That day, I called my lawyer friend, Dean, a man I'd known since high school. We'd played football together, and I knew he'd help me without hesitation. When I told him what the HOA had done, he went silent for a long moment, then said, "Shane, they messed up. Big time." Dean explained that not only was this a clear violation of property rights, but they'd trespassed to install the fence. Trespassing and obstruction were serious enough. But what caught my attention was when Dean mentioned something about easement rights. He asked me to send him old property maps and any paperwork I had. I spent the next 2 hours digging through my late father's old desk until I found the deeds, surveys, and a faded blueprint that showed something I had almost forgotten: the main road the HOA used to access their own homes actually ran through a strip of my land. That road was part of my property, and decades ago, my father had simply allowed the neighborhood to use it out of kindness. The more I looked at the documents, the more I realized the HOA had no idea about this. They assumed the road was theirs because it connected to their gates, but the legal line was clear: it was mine. Dean confirmed it after double-checking county records. "Shane," he said over the phone, "if they block your entrance, you have every right to block theirs. In fact, you could even charge them for using it. They just handed you the ultimate bargaining chip." That night, I sat at the dinner table with my wife, Sarah, and our teenage daughter, Emily. Emily was still fuming about missing her riding lesson because we couldn't get the horse trailer out. Sarah, though, was worried about escalation. "No use, Shane," she said quietly, "and I can see the storm brewing in your head. Just promise me you'll be smart about it. We've already lost so much peace since they took over that HOA board." I squeezed her hand and told her this time it wouldn't be about shouting matches or petty fights. This was going to be by the book, but that didn't mean it wouldn't hurt them. The next day, I called a local construction crew and told them I needed a gate installed. A heavy-duty, remote-controlled ranch-style gate. Not at my driveway. Not on my land near the fence they built. No, I wanted it right across that road. The only road the HOA used to get in and out of their pristine little community. The crew showed up with posts, steel panels, and a cement mixer. Within hours, the HOA president, Karen herself, came marching down the road in her perfectly pressed outfit, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This I said, pointing to the gate. "This is me protecting my property, Karen. That road you drive on belongs to me. Always has." Her face went pale for a split second before she scoffed. "That's ridiculous." "We've used this road for years." "Exactly," I said with a slow smile. "Used, past tense. And after you illegally fenced my driveway, I decided it was time to stop giving away free favors." Karen didn't back down. She threatened lawsuits, called me selfish, and even tried to guilt-trip me by saying I was trapping families inside their homes. But I didn't budge. By the end of the day, the gate was up, and I had installed a keypad and a sign that read, "Private Property. Access by permit only." Dean helped me draft official notices, one to the HOA board and one to every resident, stating that continued use of the road would require a monthly access fee payable to me. The fee wasn't small either. 'Twas enough to sting, but not enough for them to easily take me to court over. I figured if they wanted to play games, I'd play too, but my version came with invoices. The first week after the gate went up was chaos. Karen showed up almost every morning, standing on the other side of the gate, yelling at me while I fed the horses. Neighbors called, pleaded, even cursed at me. Some tried to get around the gate by driving through the field, but I quickly put up fencing and posted no trespassing signs. And every time Karen screamed about community rights, I simply held up the property deed. But the sweetest moment came a few days later, when Karen herself had to call me to ask for the gate code so she could get to her precious board meeting. I told her she'd get the code once the HOA made its first payment for the month. There was a long silence, and then, through gritted teeth, she said, "Fine, send the invoice." That night, sitting on the porch again with Sarah, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time since they'd put up that fence, I felt like I was holding the cards. And the best part was only the beginning. The next morning, I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, staring at that ridiculous fence. The early sunlight made the metal glint like it was mocking me. For years, my ranch entrance had been open and free, a symbol of trust and belonging in this land I'd worked so hard to maintain. Now, it looked like I was caged in. The HOA's handiwork wasn't just about blocking an entrance. It was about controlling me, making me bend to their rules. My father used to tell me, the first thing a bully takes from you is your right to move freely. The second is your peace. I'd lost both in 1 week. I tried to keep my composure, but inside, I was boiling. This wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about their smug little smirks when they saw me trapped. My neighbor Martha came by with fresh eggs that morning. She glanced at the fence, then at me. "They're poking the bear, John," she said softly. I could hear the worry in her voice. Martha had lived here her whole life too, and she'd seen what the HOA could do to people. They'd driven out a young couple last year just because they parked their truck in the wrong spot too many times. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the wind through the fence posts reminded me that this was now my reality. My truck sat in the driveway, idle. The only way in and out without their permission was through a narrow dirt trail on the far side of my property, barely big enough for my old ATV. They knew it too. They knew they'd trapped me in like a cornered animal, and maybe that's what they wanted for me to get desperate and sell. On the third day, I decided to talk to them. I walked to the HOA's little brick office in town. The place smelled like stale coffee and cheap printer ink. Behind the desk sat Carol, the HOA president, a sharp-faced woman with a voice that could slice through glass. "What can I help you with?" she asked, not even pretending to be polite. "You know why I'm here," I said. "That fence, it's illegal, and you know it. My ranch entrance has been there for decades. You can't just block it off." Carol's lips curled into the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. We've reviewed our property maps, that section of the road leading to your ranch. HOA maintained land. We're well within our rights. She leaned back in her chair, arms folded, but we might be willing to discuss an arrangement. That word arrangement told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about legality. It was about leverage. They wanted something from me. And what exactly do you think I'd give you? I asked. Oh, just a small monthly fee for usage rights, she said casually, like she was offering me a neighborly favor. We can draft a contract. Of course, if you don't want to pay, you can always use the alternate route. She smirked. I felt my jaw tighten. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out. My boots hit the pavement hard, each step fueled by a growing determination. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they could charge me to access my own home. That evening, I called my cousin Luke, who worked in the county records office. If anyone could dig up the truth about that strip of land, it was him. He was more than happy to help. He'd had his own run-ins with the HOA in his neighborhood. Within 2 days, he called back. John, you're not going to believe this. That land, it's not HOA property at all. In fact, the deed says you have an easement right-of-way for permanent access. They can't legally block it. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't just rush in with the news, not yet. If I played this right, I could turn their little power grab into something far worse for them. I decided to let them think they were winning, at least for a while. Let them get comfortable, so, for the next week, I used that narrow ATV trail. It was inconvenient, sure, but every time I passed that shiny new fence, I pictured the look on Carol's face when she realized her little plan had backfired. And I wasn't just planning to remove the fence, I was going to make sure every single one of them regretted ever touching my ranch entrance. Late one night, under a sky full of stars, I stood by the fence with my flashlight, running my fingers over the cold metal. You've made a big mistake, I whispered. Not to the fence, but to the people behind it. They just didn't know it yet. The wind carried the scent of rain from the mountains, and with it came an idea, one that would not only bring me justice, but also make them pay, literally. Every single time they crossed the very ground they were trying to control. The 5th morning after the fence went up, I woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel right outside my bedroom window. I peeked through the blinds and saw 3 HOA board members standing in front of the fence, pointing at my land and talking angrily. Their cars were parked halfway across my driveway, blocking me in like they owned the place. That was the final straw. They had already turned my quiet home into a war zone, and I wasn't going to let them play landlord on my own property. Stepped outside in my boots, letting the cold wind hit me as I stared them down. You need to move those cars, now. My voice was calm, but there was an edge that made them hesitate. The HOA president, a smug man named Clark, smirked and said, "Your driveway isn't a public road anymore, remember? We have access now." Access, he meant trespassing. And the nerve in my jaw tightened. "Not without paying for it," I said, pulling out a folder from under my arm. Inside was a certified letter I had been drafting for days, a toll agreement. Every time a car passed through my entrance, they would owe me $200. They laughed like I was joking, but I had already filed the notice with the county. I'd spent nights combing through property easement laws, finding a loophole so tight it would strangle their little HOAS budget. Clark's smirk faltered when he realized my plan wasn't just bluster. He looked back at the fence, then at the road, then back at me like a man trying to do quick math in his head. "You can't enforce this," he said. "Try me," I replied, stepping closer until my boots crunched against the frozen dirt. "And every day you delay payment, the fee doubles." The first week, they ignored me. They drove through like nothing had changed, each trip racking up charges I kept neatly recorded in a worn leather ledger. By the 10th day, they owed me nearly $8,000, and that was just the HOA board members. The rest of the neighborhood hadn't even been billed yet. I mailed each homeowner a copy of the toll agreement with a friendly note. Failure to pay may result in restricted access. I could almost hear the panic ripple through the streets when the letters landed in their mailboxes. They called me. They texted me. Some even showed up on my porch trying to reason with me. I didn't raise my voice, didn't curse, didn't back down. I simply pointed to the fence they had built and said, "You wanted this separation, remember?" The HOA's arrogance started to crack. Clark stormed into the county clerk's office, demanding the toll be thrown out. But the law was on my side. He tried rallying the neighbors, painting me as some kind of greedy villain. But they knew the truth. I wasn't the one who started this. They were trapped by their own fence, and now every mile they drove came with a price tag. The real shift came one cold evening when I was stacking firewood, and Clark's wife pulled up in her SUV. She rolled down the window and, without meeting my eyes, handed me a thick envelope. "We're not agreeing to your little scheme," she muttered, "but here's something to show good faith." I opened it after she left $2,000 in cash. Not full payment, but enough to prove they were cracking. But I didn't just want money. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done, to know that crossing me meant more than cutting a check. So I started tightening the rules. No cash, no crossing, no exceptions. It didn't take long before some residents had to park on the other side of the fence and walk through the cold just to get home. The sight of them trudging up their driveways in the frost was grim satisfaction. Every look they gave me, a mix of shame, frustration, and defeat, was a reminder that I was winning. And still, I waited for the moment I knew was coming. When the HOA would beg to take the fence down. That moment wasn't far now. The cracks were turning into breaks, and I could almost taste the final victory. But first, I was going to make them pay in full, every single cent. The revenge wasn't over yet. The first heavy rain of the season came earlier than expected. Dark clouds rolled in, wind whistled through the trees, and the sky cracked with thunder. I stood on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the drops hit the dusty ground like tiny explosions. It should have been a peaceful moment, but I knew the HOA would never let things stay quiet for long. They couldn't stand the idea of me winning, of them being the ones paying instead of collecting. And I was right. Just after lunch, I saw a convoy of shiny SUVs pull up to the gate, 6 of them lined up like they were ready for battle. At the front, Margaret stepped out, umbrella in hand. Her expression the perfect mix of arrogance and false politeness. "Mr. Carter," she began, raising her voice over the rain, "we've decided this nonsense has gone on long enough. We are here to negotiate." I almost laughed. Negotiate? From the people who once told me I'd regret resisting the HOA. But I stayed calm, leaning against the porch railing. "Funny," I said. "I thought you enjoyed paying me every time you came through. What's changed?" "Getting expensive." Her jaw tightened. The others behind her shifted uncomfortably, like soldiers who suddenly realized their general might lose the war. They wanted me to remove the fence and the toll gate in exchange for a generous one-time payout. Margaret threw out a number. That made me raise an eyebrow, not because it was high, but because it was insultingly low compared to what they'd already paid me in the past few months. "That's cute," I replied. "You're offering me less than you've already paid. And you still think I'm the one being unreasonable?" One of the younger board members, a guy named Peter, finally spoke up. "Look, this whole thing is making everyone miserable. Can't we find some middle ground?" That's when I pulled out the folder I'd been keeping for months. Inside were copies of every single toll payment receipt, photos of HOA members, trying to sneak around the fence through the woods, and even a few police reports from when they tried to damage the gate. I laid it all out on the hood of Margaret's SUV, the rain smearing the ink, but not enough to hide the truth. "This isn't just about my land," I said quietly. "This is about every neighbor you've bullied, every dollar you've squeezed out of people just trying to live their lives. I'm not dropping this until you drop the HOA's control over this whole street." For a moment, no one spoke. The rain hammered down, wind tugging at their umbrellas. Margaret's face twitched. She knew what I was asking was basically the death of their power. She also knew I had enough evidence to make them look like fools or worse, criminals. "You'd ruin your own neighbors just to make a point," she finally said, voice sharp. I stepped closer, looking her dead in the eye. "No, Margaret. I'd ruin bullies so good people can breathe again." Then, as if nature itself was backing me up, lightning flashed so bright it lit up every face in front of me. A second later, the gate beeped, the sensor triggered as another HOA vehicle tried to pass through. The machine printed their toll. Receipt automatically, the sound cutting through the rain like a punchline. Peter muttered something under his breath, and a few of the others looked away, embarrassed. Margaret slammed her SUV door shut without another word and drove off, tires splashing through the puddles. The rest followed. I stood there watching them disappear into the storm, the receipts flapping in my hand. It wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time, I felt the scales tipping fully in my favor. They were cracking under the pressure, and I was going to be the one to deliver the final blow by the time the final piece of my plan was ready. I had already made peace with the fact that I could never truly forgive them. Forgiveness was for people who had tried to make amends. The HOA had only doubled down on cruelty, greed, and arrogance. They thought they could break me, turn my life into a miserable waiting game. But all they had done was give me more time to sharpen the knife. The sky that morning was a deep, endless blue. One of those days when the air feels crisp and alive, as if the whole world is holding its breath. I stood by the old oak tree at the edge of my ranch, watching as the first of the HOA board members' cars rolled toward the gate. My gate, my land, my rules. The hum of tires on gravel felt like the heartbeat of justice itself, one by one. Their shiny luxury SUVs slowed to a crawl, the drivers glancing around nervously. They knew what today was. The ink on our new agreement had barely dried, the one stating that every single time they crossed onto my property, which they now had to, since my entrance road was the only viable path to their homes, they would pay me a toll, not just a fee. A toll that would, over time, bleed them dry. It was poetic, really. For years, they'd treated me as if my land was an inconvenience to their perfect little world. Now it was the artery that kept them connected to everything they needed. And I was the one holding the clamp. I leaned on the fence, nodding politely as each car stopped at the small toll booth I'd built just for them. Not some cheap plastic hut, no. This was a handcrafted wooden structure with brass details, a cash register, and a camera that recorded every transaction. The cameras weren't just for show. I wanted proof. Proof of their submission. Mrs. Hanover was first. Her face, once twisted in superiority, was pale and tight. She rolled down her window, her diamond bracelet glinting in the sun, and placed the cash into the tray without a word. I gave her my sweetest smile. "Morning, Mrs. Hanover. Lovely day for a drive, isn't it?" She said nothing, but her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. Behind her, Peterson's black Mercedes waited. The man had once threatened to have me arrested for hosting a charity barbecue without HOA approval. Now, he was fumbling with his wallet like a kid caught without lunch money. He handed over the bills, avoiding my eyes. I didn't let him off easy. "Ah, Peterson, Always good to see you. Your route's looking a little longer these days, huh? By the time the seventh car passed through, the pile of cash in my drawer was thick. And it wasn't just about the money. It was the shift in power, the reversal of years of humiliation. Every single one of them now had to acknowledge me, to see my face, to remember exactly who they'd underestimated. The real kicker. They couldn't complain. I'd won the case in court fair and square. My attorney had made sure the contract was ironclad. They'd tried to find other routes, even offered obscene amounts of money to a neighboring landowner, but no one was willing to cross me now. I was untouchable. As the sun climbed higher, I took a slow walk down the road, letting the gravel crunch under my boots. The ranch looked beautiful. My fences repaired, my fields open, the livestock grazing peacefully. I thought of my father, who'd built this place with his bare hands. I thought of my wife, who had stood beside me through every sleepless night. And I thought of the moment when the HOA had first locked me out. Thinking they'd taken something from me, they hadn't taken it. They'd just made me fight for it harder. In the weeks that followed, the toll payments became routine. Some of them tried to pretend it didn't bother them. Others couldn't hide the sting. But I noticed how the smiles at their HOA meetings had faded, how the flowers in their perfect front yards began to wilt. It's hard to keep up appearances when the cost of simply getting home eats away at your pride and your wallet. One evening, as I was closing the toll booth, my wife came out with 2 mugs of coffee. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. "Feels good, doesn't it?" she said. "It's not about the money," I told her, though the money certainly didn't hurt. "It's about making them understand." "And do you think they do?" I looked out over the road, watching as the last car of the day disappeared into the distance. Oh, they understand. Every single mile they drive through here is a reminder. We stood there until the sun dipped below the horizon, the air turning cool, the smell of fresh earth and hay wrapping around us. I realized then that the fight was over, not because I'd destroyed them, but because I'd taken back everything they'd tried to steal from me. My land, my peace, my dignity. The HOA still existed. They still had their rules, their polished smiles, their little power plays. But now, every time they came home, they had to look me in the eye. And every time they did, I knew they were remembering the day they thought they could fence me out of my own life, and ended up paying me for the privilege to enter it. And that was a victory worth every sleepless night.